So on to the big one, killer whales, also known as orca. Starting off with that's normally quite a common question. Are orca and killer whales the same thing? They are. The reason they have two different names, one comes from the Latin, that's orca, and the common name is killer whale. Starting with the common name, they got the name killer whale because they are known to kill and eat whales. Orca comes from their Latin, Orcinus orca, and it's really interesting that SeaWorld is the reason that orca has become so popular, one of the reasons. They decided that having killer whale branded across their building wasn't exactly the best marketing ploy, so they decided to make orca more popular. So the Latin for killer whale is Orcinus orca. They dropped the Orcinus part and made orca more popular. Ironically though, Orcinus orca in Latin does translate to demon whale, so I'll leave it up to you what you think is better, killer whale or demon whale. Whichever language you put it, these whales have a bad reputation. But it is a little bit unfair to give them such a harsh rap. They have actually never been reported to kill a human in the wild, only in captivity. Of course, in the food chain, they are right up at the top. There is nothing that scares a killer whale. There's actually been footage caught off the coast of South Africa of killer whales killing a great white shark. So not even great white sharks are anything for the killer whale to be afraid of. So that's quite a neat fact. People often ask whether orca are afraid of great white sharks, and the answer is no. They are simply the bosses of the ocean. So starting off with the basics, they are a black and white whale. The males are larger than the females. The male's largest male killer whale is probably about 8 meters long. The female's about 6 meters long. You can tell the difference between the males and the females though pretty easily, and that is from their dorsal fins. Males are much taller and much pointier like a triangle than the females that are smaller and more curved like your dolphin fin. The male dorsal fin can actually grow up to be about 2 meters in height. That is taller than myself. It is a very tall, prominent fin. But the males, they do have to grow into their fin. They do have to earn it. They won't be fully grown until they're in their 20s. You may see a pod of killer whales and not see any of those tall dorsal fins. It doesn't mean that there's not any males there. It just doesn't mean there's any fully grown males there. But the size of the killer whale actually depends on what ecotype we are looking at. So across the globe, killer whales are the same species, but depending on where you find them, we get different ecotypes. So it's a bit like humans. We are all Homo sapiens, but depending on where in the world you find us, we have different behaviors, different cultures, different languages, different diets, and that is exactly the same as the killer whale. So for example, if you were to see killer whales in Norway, they are really good at feeding on the herring, and they will round it up. In New Zealand, they tend to go after the stingray. And here in these waters, the main two ecotypes of killer whales we get are, one are salmon eaters, also known as the southern residents, and the others are marine mammal eaters, also known as the transient killer whales. So often when we're coming onto scene with killer whales, it's good to say which ecotype we are seeing. More often than not, that will be the transient killer whales, the marine mammal eaters. Reason for that, they are much more prevalent. They are doing really, really well, the transient killer whales, the marine mammal eaters. Reason being, their prey source is really abundant. Seal and sea lion hunting was banned in the 1970s. Since then, seal and sea lion populations have spiked, and when there's lots of food, the whales are happy, and when they're happy they reproduce more. So this population, this ecotype of killer whales is doing really, really well. So the marine mammal eaters are growing by about 4% every single year at the moment. So that is really good. Unfortunately, the same cannot be said for the southern residents. This population is really dwindling. It sits around 73 individuals currently while I'm filming this. And the reason being, they have a very niche diet. They feed on salmon, really specifically Chinook salmon, and unfortunately because of anthropogenic effects, the buildings of dams and pollutions in our oceans, there is not enough salmon in the water. There is not nearly as much as there used to be. So these resident whales are having to travel further to be able to find more salmon. So unfortunately there's real problems there with the southern residents, the salmon eaters, starving. So there really is stark differences. Even though they both are under the species of killer whale, there's really a big difference between the two. So another really interesting thing to talk about when you see the killer whales is to talk about their sociality. So they are a very, very social species. Their pod is composed of a female with her offspring. So it is a matriarchal society. The oldest female in the group will be in charge. The females are the bosses. If you are lucky enough to see one of those fully grown adult males, that will not be the father of the offspring. That is the son. Killer whales are massive mama's boys. They will stay with their mother, stick by her side for the duration of their lives. So it's actually been found that when a female mother dies before her son, often the son dies soon after because he can't look after himself without his mother being around. So that's a really interesting point of killer whale social structure. And the reason mothers often outlive their sons is because of their life expectancy. Females live much, much longer than the males. They can live till about 60, 70 years old, whereas the males only live about 30 to 40 years old. One of the reasons for that, these animals are right up at the top of the food chain. So unfortunately, all of the toxins in the water, heavy metals, different chemicals will accumulate right at the top with the orca. Luckily, the females have a way of getting rid of these toxins, that is by giving birth. So when they give birth, they'll offload, unfortunately, those toxins to their young. The males, they have no way of getting rid of these toxins, so they actually often die due to the result of all those toxins, or it's a contributing factor. In fact, when a killer whale washes up dead on a beach, it has to be treated like toxic waste. That is how much contaminants are in these whales. It is also quite nice if you have been able to ID the specific family, to be able to tell the passengers a little bit about the history of this family. So we can tell specific individual killer whales from their dorsal fins. Some can be different shapes and sizes, little nicks out of them, little scars, but they act as if they are, again, the fingerprint of the animal. You can also tell the individuals from their saddle patches. This is a little white strip across the base of their dorsal fin, and also their eye patch, that little white eye patch on the side of their head. So you can tell the difference between individuals through that, and that is what can ultimately lead you to be able to ID the whole family. So it's quite fun to be able to ID the family and tell your guests a little bit about that. And last but not least, the babies, the little orca calves. So unlike the humpback whales who have a breeding season, killer whales can reproduce all year round. Babies are very evident, not only because of their smaller size. They're about 2 meters long. That's actually the size of an adult bottlenose dolphin, so they're still pretty big, but they're still babies in the orca world. And they also have a little yellowish tint to them. They'll have this yellowish tint for approximately 2 years, and they think this yellowish tint just comes from their blood capillaries sitting quite close to their skin, and they haven't quite got enough blubber and fat to cover, so their capillaries are still quite close to the surface. When the babies are born, it is a live birth into the water. You can also tell the really fresh ones because they may have some what is called fetal folds. So that when they're in the womb of their mother, they're all folded up on themselves. When they're born, they have some crease markings from where they were curled up, little lines on their bodies, and that can tell us that they are very fresh as well. They will suckle on their mothers as well. Their mother's milk is so thick they can actually suspend it in the water and have some indirect feeding as well. But that young calf will be fed by its mother until it learns to hunt, which it will be taught from the rest of the pod as well. That little baby will actually stay with its mother, if it's a male, for the whole entirety of its life. Most commonly, there are a few exceptions of lone males, but that's actually one part of research we don't actually know anything about, why lone male killer whales exist, because they are such a social being. But if they're male, they will stay with their mother most commonly for the rest of their life. If they're a female, they'll stay with their mother. It depends on the individual. Some females leave and then they just go off and mate and they do their own thing. They're a little bit independent. Some other females, they'll stay until they have 1 or 2 calves, and their mum will help them raise their children, teach her daughter what it's like to be a mum, like humans do, and then the female, the daughter, will take her offspring and they will go off and they'll start a new family of their own. So that's how new families are created, by the daughters taking their offspring away and starting a new family. That is the creation of families in orca society.